All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started in about a minute. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like, let us know where you are dialing in from in the comments. I'm here from beautiful Chicago, Illinois, where it is um, 90 degrees already at 10 a.m. So it should be a good one today. Nicola, where are you joining us from?
I am in Guildford, Surrey, England, and it's kind of average. It's okay weather.
Well, it sounds lovely. Definitely better than the extreme heat we've been having. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us. We know that you have a lot going on in your work, and so we appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time to learn this morning. We're going to get started with our webinar, A Framework to Sustain Sales Training. A quick housekeeping note, we'll be sending out the slides and recording in the next couple days. So look for that in your inbox. And if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in that little box titled Q&A, and we will have some time at the end to answer them. And then if you've got comments or ideas or thoughts you want to share throughout the webinar, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Thanks so much. Let's go ahead and introduce you to today's presenters. All right. I am Stevie Keene. I am the Senior Director of Content and Creative here at Richardson and Challenger. And my producer this morning is our Marketing Manager, Sarah Doherty. Today's webinar is going to focus on a very important topic that is near and dear to all of us, which is sustaining sales training. I'm delighted to introduce our presenter, Nicola Amiss. She is our VP of International here at Richardson and Challenger. She has spent more than half of her career in sales training and consulting companies on driving growth. She has led 7 B2B commercial teams, both as a sales leader and client advisor. And one of her things she is excellent at is helping clients drive change, which is exactly why we've invited her to lead today's conversation. So, Nicola, let's go ahead and get started with what I think is one of the hardest things in driving growth, which is change management.
Mhm. Thanks, Stevie. Well, good to see you, everyone, virtually. And thanks for taking time out of your morning, day, and for some folks, evening. So thank you very much. Um, it's interesting because I was thinking about this session and posted on LinkedIn yesterday that we only take between 10 and 20% of our waking hours actually in meaningful reflection. So whilst you're active and hopefully listening, it is an opportunity to reflect on some of the changes that you're leading, whether it's your own portfolio, team, business, and how often we get stuck in the doing and less in the reflecting. So I'm hoping at the very least you can take 30 minutes of your day to think about some of those changes and take a couple of ideas away from this. So let's begin. And where we wanted to start was really anchoring ourselves in the collective around why change fails. Now, I'll be interested to see in the chat how many of you are either familiar with John Kotter's work in leading change and the 8 steps, or indeed use it as a framework yourself. So it'd be interesting to see how many people are familiar with that already. And if you're not, I do suggest you have a look at, there's a lovely YouTube video, very quick, called Our Iceberg is Melting, which is around some penguins going through their own change. So let's have a little look at how these break down and why change fails. And starting with the good old McKinsey statistic of 70% of change initiatives and transformations fail. We're probably all familiar with that statistic. But actually, what's more interesting for me, certainly, is understanding why. So, first of all, organizations, teams not creating a sense of urgency. Really, this is all around the why and the feeling of inspiring people to act, to generate that conviction and inspiration for people to invest some energy in the change. Second, we've got not creating enough of a guiding coalition. And this is both your volunteer army, your network of people that are the champions, but also those that are representing a diverse group of people and skills, and more importantly, executives teams freeing up time for people to do this change work so that it's not just from the side of their desks. That's something that we often see as a reason for things failing. Third of all, of course, forming a strategic vision for change and buy-in. How will the new world look different and better so that we can anchor on that? Then we've got failure to communicate. We've all been in situations where it might have been a once and done. And of course, the best story wins. Communicate time and time again and bring that vision to life. Then we've got not empowering others to act and removing obstacles. So actually identifying them and acting on those as and when they are created. Generating short-term wins, publishing success, rewarding success. Deciding, often organizations fail, teams fail because they decide to move on for an initiative too soon. So what can you do to ensure that that effort is sustained, accelerated, and then institutionalized? So there's some of the reasons that are published around why change initiatives, transformations fail. We're going to go and kind of dig into that more from a behavioral perspective, looking at capability building and skill development. So if we move on a slide, we're going to just get some common understanding around what we mean by sustainment, because sometimes people use sustainment and reinforcement interchangeably. So just have a little read on that screen of the descriptor that we're using when we talk about sustainment being a long-term effort, outcome focused, as opposed to reinforcement focused on a behavior to avoid regression. Okay. So now we're all aligned on what we're actually talking about when it comes down to sustainment. Curious to know, and if you can put in the chat here, what's the level of organizational maturity or sustainment at your company? And this could be anything from underdeveloped, doesn't exist, to highly mature, no experience. Just keen to get the sentiment here as we go through this time together. So if you've got any immediate thoughts, please pop them in the chat. Emily. Nascent, I love that. Non-existent, yes. Okay, so we've got some differences. That's great. And isn't that interesting? You know, every end of the spectrum, from barely exist, non-existent, to very mature and everything in between, which you would expect. So let's move on as we start to drill down between and look at the sustainment efforts again. So we've tried to categorize this quite simply, going from big organizational transformation change to capability building. So we're now focused on building revenue growth teams, skills, and the associated capabilities. So what are the reasons that we have challenges in sustaining those long-term efforts? Well, first of all, we often see that learning takes place in a vacuum, and that's twofold. One is the revenue engine. So often you see that sellers' learning journeys are disconnected from marketing, from product, from customer success, etc. So it's that connected revenue engine is often not connected. Often it's also not personalized, whether that's by market, by team, or by situation. Individuals can't see themselves or their customers in that world. So that's one of the first reasons, one of the challenges that we see. Secondly, as we build this out, is the difficulty to apply in the day-to-day. If we all think about typical commercial individual contributors, sellers, professional sellers working in B2B environments, they're pivoting from planning for a CXO conversation to doing a negotiation to having a client escalation or a service issue, doing their pipeline. And it's not a linear day-to-day work. So actually learning just in time versus just in case becomes even more important and in the flow of work. So that's one of the reasons individuals struggle, because it's not just in time or in the flow of work. Next, it's the lack of real-time actionable feedback. And one of the constraints, I guess, we see with this is that managers, yes, they are the force multipliers and can support and elevate and amplify teams. However, they're also highly extended. Whether you're asking your managers to forecast, co-sell, team sell, report to the board, there's very little time often to actually do that real work of coaching. And one of the pieces of data from Gartner tells us that only 9% of sales managers' time is spent coaching. Not only that, nearly half of the managers that shared that said they didn't have the confidence needed to develop their team. So that's a real constraint and a blocker to being able to scale. And last of all, we see that sustainment often feels and is often disconnected from actual performance. So there needs to be some correlation between what the sellers are doing and what we're feeding them in terms of real-time actionable skills, feedback, and insight. Now, what does that all lead to? Well, it leads to the misalignment between those three critical groups: sales management, leadership, and enablement. So once we understand what some of those common sustainment challenges are, we can start to break it down and come up with a plan of action. So let's have a look at what we can do about it and how we talk about it in today's kind of language. Well, the concept of learning in the flow of work or learning outside the classroom has been around for a long time, and many of you will probably be familiar with the Centre of Creative Leadership, CCL's model, which is now going back to the 1980s, which broke it down into an ideal mix of 70% of learning from challenging on-the-job experiences, 20% from developmental relationships, social learning, peer-to-peer, buddy learning and coaching, and then only 10% from formal training and coursework. Certainly for me, I find that's a bit of a cognitive load if you're adding that in your day-to-day as well as everything else that you have to do to break that down. So we're posing that there's a different way of thinking about it, which is much simpler, and that's introducing a simplified 3-to-1 ratio. So better expressed, for every single learning event, you need to deliver 3 on-the-job applications to sustain it. So just one little tip to be able to enable us to simplify some of these models and ideas. And again, that's expressed there. So simply 3-to-1 enablement ratio to activate a more simpler way of execution. So we put together a sustainment framework, and the reason for this is having a framework enables you to have some honesty around where you're actually performing, but also recognition that everyone's teams and their support functions are very different. We ran a conference very recently for our clients. We come across enablement and sales operations teams with 1 person. We come across some with 20. So all teams are created differently. And in order to really place where you are, we put together a sustainment framework, and we'll start to build that out to you. So level 1, everyone's doing their own thing. It's probably down to the individuals and managers. You're probably experiencing pockets of excellence in the company, and it's likely to be driven by some individual top performers and strong managers who are typically very curious. So level 1 is ad hoc and random. Level 2, the organisation's likely to have built out a number of assets to support sellers. There may be an enablement platform such as a high spot or a sales loft. Some coaching may exist, but there's a relatively low level of integration and inspection as far as the manager's concerned. Other things always take priority, and sustainment is therefore put on the back burner. As you start to work up that maturity level to level 3, your sales processes are likely to be integrated with your customer's buying journey, aligned to your methodology, and probably will exist within your CRM integrated. There's more structure within the organization from a DNA perspective as to the expectation from sales management, sales leadership, and more alignment and connectivity between those revenue teams that we spoke about: marketing, sales, customer success, and so on. Coaching is embedded, and you're probably using some insights from your tech stack as far as your win-loss analytics. Level 4, the Holy Grail, we're calling that internalized or institutionalized. So that's just the way things are done around here. All the systems are fully integrated: CRM, conversational intelligence, enablement tools, coaching prioritized using both human and AI in partnership, and data-driven insights inform adaptive and agile decisions that drive prioritization. That's pushed out at the rep level. So those are the 4 levels that we've identified. Now, each of those levels have some sample ideas that we've put in, and what we're not suggesting that this is a shopping list or a linear approach and you have to go from one to another. It aims to throw some ideas out, food for thought. So if we look at level 1, it is likely, because this is ad hoc and random, that you'd have some job aids and individuals creating call planners, etc., maybe some expert reminders, but it very much is random. At level 2, you'll see there some assets, digital libraries, question banks, objection banks, client stories, best-in-class videos. So you're more likely to have a bigger bank of assets available at level 2. As we look at level 3, that might be more quarterly as far as an initiative. So if you see, for example, there's Real Deal Coaching, that could be something pushed at an initiative level and structured across the calendar year. And then at level 4, you'll see a lot more ideas in there around more strategic activation. And then we'll come back to it. There's AI-powered feedback loops for sellers and managers, including AI coaching. So that gives you a feel for how we look at sustainment. And this is a time for reflection and pause for yourselves. And we've got a question that we're going to pose in the chat. Because we're keen to see from you, what are some practical examples you have of executing sustainment activities, and we'll obviously capture those in the chat, and it'd be interesting to share those. Another idea that we've had is, if there is enough interest at the end of this webinar, we would look to host a roundtable on this so that you can actively share. And again, this is what we did at the RevEdge client conference. So anyone that wants to just drop the ideas in chat, is there any practical examples of how your organization has executed sustainment? And we'll put the maturity chart back up again to give you some other ideas whilst you're doing that. Lovely, thank you, Sarah. Oh, level up sessions. Love that, Donald. Champion communities, thanks, Emma. Wonderful, nice variety there coming into the chat as well. Micro learning, micro bursts, office hours, perfect. Fascinating if we all had the opportunity to talk live as well as to where you would plot your maturity. What was quite interesting from the customer conference was some real honesty around the fact that actually a lot of people really are level 1, level 2 job aids, lots of job aids, brilliant. Data-driven coaching, thank you. Wonderful ideas, thank you very much. Great, okay. So if we go back to that sustainment framework, one of the ideas that we wanted to bring to life for you is something that excitedly we've just launched in Richardson, which is AI Coach. Now, if you remember that data around only 9% of sales managers actually using their time to directly coach their teams, one of the capabilities that's been launched is AI coaching, to be able to support and partner with managers to provide coaching feedback at scale. So I'll provide a brief scenario as to what this would look like, and then we're going to show you 3 screens to bring to life that AI capability. So the scenario is I'm a seller and preparing for a CXO meeting, and I've downloaded the Access to Power content from my platform. I've taken that content in 15 minutes, and I've got an objective that you'll see here that's landed in my to-do list for me to record a practice video around the message I'll give my mobilizer to access the CXO for a conversation. Now, if you hover down towards the bottom, which says resource, the Access Power worksheet I've downloaded, and I'm going to spend, I did this about 10 minutes on actually creating my choreography and my message to be able to access power. So I've downloaded that worksheet, and then the platform gives me an opportunity to record my message. So I open up my message, record it, and I can record numerous times. If I'm not happy with how it's been presented, the pacing, or some of my language, I can delete and re-record. From that, some minutes later, I seem to recall it was 3 to 5, I have feedback which tells me where I was strong relative to that access to power piece of content and where I had the opportunity for further improvement. So if you have a look at the feedback that I had in this situation, for example, It's saying that I could use more confident phrasing, such as I recommend we engage, etc. That's my feedback. And you can collect a library of these best in class videos or not. You can be selective. And these can obviously all sit on the platform so that you have, again, if we go back to our leading change and some of those constraints, um, publishing success and quick wins. You can recognize sellers for being able to record those messages, publish those messages, sustain momentum. It addresses a number of those issues that we identified early as to why some of those change efforts fail, including the fact that managers have very limited time. So that brings us towards the end, and we're going to open up Q&A. And I guess I just wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts, really. And one was the intentionality around planning for change and really building that time in, whether it's a John Cotter change model or whether you create your own sustainment framework. It's the intentionality to plan for the change, who to engage, to create the time for them to do that, not just from the side of their desks. And then I guess the honesty around where we are today. If we're going to create a roadmap as to where we are and where we want to be, some honesty around where we really are in order to be able to actually make progress. So I'm going to close it there and start to open up for some reflections, questions, or even anyone that wants to share any stories.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Now, just a bit of housekeeping. If you've got a question, go ahead and pop it into that Q&A tab, and we'll be sharing them out here. Or you can drop your thoughts or any stories you want to share over in the webinar chat. If you are looking for a deeper dive into how AI can support enablement, we actually released a brief on this topic earlier this summer. It's called Scaling Sustainable Enablement with Purposeful AI, and you can just scan that QR code and get it and download it and give it a good read. Nicola, while we wait for questions, is there an example from your career that you'd like to share of how you kind of moved along that framework?
Well, we're in it at the moment, Stevie. So I think it's a really good it's a really good example. I mean, as you'll know, and many people that have joined us for the call, we're going through change, as are many of our clients, in terms of our innovations, the integrations that we're going through. And for me, actually leaning into the Cotter model and thinking about creating those intentional moments, especially around knowledge share. I saw some of the webinar chat, intentional knowledge sharing between the teams and constant communication, because you're absolutely right. We are very much in a change process ourselves, having gone through a recent acquisition and merger. So it's a great time for me to reflect as well as we go through this.
I agree. Having come from the other side of that merger into this, it's definitely been a challenge, but a good challenge. So, something I'm going to ask about too, just based on your experience. Obviously, we're living it a little bit right now, but also with your experience as a sales leader, how do you move along? Like, if you're kind of solidly in that ad hoc place, what kind of things can you do as a sales leader to move you along that journey to get to that next place without necessarily risking anything?
Yeah. Um, I think one of the challenges is very much around time, and what I said about there's always something else that needs to happen. And so much of it is around managing internal stakeholders, managing up, as well as managing teams and managing clients. So I personally do spend a lot of my time managing up around the importance of creating time for coaching, creating time for skill building, as well as the deals that need to close, the escalations and everything else. So mine is very much around stakeholder management.
Great. All right, we've got a couple questions coming in from the audience. I'm going to start with one from Denise, which is any best practices for overcoming internal resistance to role plays of any type? We'd like to encompass those in our sustainment activities, but face great existence.
Gosh, that is such a great question, Denise. And I looked at that earlier and I thought, wow, how do I answer that one? Um, this is from personal experience. I find sellers listen to feedback mostly from clients and from successful peers. So, as we think about role plays in order to get better, actually, if you can correlate them with a why, with a strong why, and have a look at some win-loss analytics, why are you winning? Why are you losing business? And correlate the behaviors associated, that gives the sellers much more of a stronger why. And if that correlation can be in relation to client feedback, in addition to high performing sellers, that personally helps give me teams a why more. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Nicola. Our next question, I really like this one. Uh, any advice on trying to take sales managers on a learning journey around active listening as part of effective coaching?
Mhm. Um, Gosh, I've spent quite a long time working with active listening. So this is a question very dear to my heart because it's very common, as Emma will know, who asked the question, that most people listen with a view to respond with their thinking, as opposed to listen, to learn, to be curious, and then to respond. So for me, there's probably some learning in there, and there's some work around mindset as to what are we listening for. And there's a big piece around trust. And are we listening with self-orientated behaviors to respond because there's something in it for us, or are we listening with a genuine concern to learn more with the clients in mind? So I think there's a bit around mindset and there's a bit around education and maybe some behavioral science, Emma. Long answer, but that's how I'd answer that question.
All right. Thank you so much. We've got a couple product questions. Nothing too complicated, Nicola, but I think they're good ones to ask. So, uh, the AI coaches, do they coach in different European languages? That one came from Mercedes.
Oh, that's a great question. Gosh, this group's on fire. Okay, my understanding, and I will check with Kate, who leads product, is right now it's in English. I am 100% sure it's on the roadmap, but I can't tell you Mercedes when. So perhaps we can take your email and get the when out to the group because I know it's on the roadmap.
Yeah, and this is something that's important to us because we understand we had a follow up on cultural capability, which I think is related. This is something that's really important to us here at Richardson. We know that that we this is something that is definitely in our roadmap and that we will be incorporating because it's really important, and especially if you're going to support your sellers in getting better, we need to make sure that they're able to practice in a realistic environment that mimics what they're going to do out in the real world. All right, we've got another question from Mike Pudlow. How do you acknowledge and address the difference between what more senior sales professionals do with what we are teaching versus what the newer sales professionals do? Because there's some inconsistency, and it's, like prospecting in 2010 to 2019 looks very different from prospecting now. So, how do you address that gap in generational differences in training?
That's a really big question, Mike. Let's take prospecting in its own right, because that's a big question in itself. And you're absolutely right around social selling and the level of comfort with and AI, using AI for research, for prospecting, and the level of comfort around different generations. So how we would deal with that is through some initial assessment around someone's level of confidence and competence to increase self-awareness to start with as to where they're at. There's always a will and skill conversation, isn't there? It's not just where am I at confidence and competence, but am I open to change? Because you're spot on, there's a very big difference with how people used to prospect even 6 years ago and how we are using AI in particular and social selling to prospect today. So I think I would generally start with that skill and will and behavioral piece to figure out where someone is at, in addition to their openness to learn and their growth mindset. And if there is an openness to learn, great, then you can put those in place. But if someone is much more of a fixed mindset and I can't change, I've been doing it this way for X amount of years, then obviously that's a different performance conversation. That would be my view. Hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Thank you. And then this is going to be our last question of the day from Lindsay. What are the key metrics of success and non-revenue measurements to look for as teams progress from level 1 of the sustainment framework to level 4?
Mm. Key metrics of success and non-revenue metrics. I think I would want to personalize the sustainment to you and your business and your teams. And then, like any metrics or KPIs, put in a combination of those leading and lagging indicators. So, the leading ones being that we know we're on the right path and we're making progress, things that are observed, really, easy to accomplish things, versus those lagging indicators where they're actually going to move the performance needle, whether that's moving someone's skill or capabilities up a level, whether it's generating more revenue, increasing profit. So I'd probably want to personalize the sustainment framework, identify leading and lagging indicators, and put no more than 3 or 4. And it goes back to that create early wins and publish success, not to try and do too much or boil the ocean.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This is such a great set of questions. And Nicola, thank you so much for everything you've shared today. I know I learned a lot. I hope all of you did too. We will be sending you the recording and slides in the next few days. Take a look at that QR code to follow us on LinkedIn and join us next month when we will be hosting Veolia to talk about the power of learning ROI. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you all.